What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Getting back on the live stream grind here. I'm getting started a little bit early for those who are watching live. The plan for today's live stream is to go back to the old format of lake breakdowns I used to do when I started my very first stream ever on this channel. It's crazy to think that this is actually live stream number 146, I think. I have to read the thing here, but it's 140 something, which is absolutely crazy, and it's really cool to see that we have that many streams out there. And I kind of wanted to just get back to the basics and just start breaking down lakes with you guys. We have 3 lakes in the docket today. We got Grand Lake over in Oklahoma, a highland reservoir. We have Sam Rayburn Reservoir, which is a lowland reservoir down in Texas, and then Lake Norman over in North Carolina. I wanted to do one of these breakdowns because I have a lot more tools and I have a lot more, or I guess a different perspective on breaking down lakes than I did 5 years ago. And I wanted to kind of redo this whole format because I feel like I look at lakes so much differently now, and I think that there's a lot of great things that I can share with all the new tools and everything we have available. So great to see everyone in the chat. We got Carrie, Zach, JB. How's it going? Some of the regulars from back in the day from streaming. Hoping to do these regularly, weekly going forward, guys. And so it's really cool that some of you guys are already back at it, even though it's been a little while. And hopefully we'll keep up those consistent streams, and that will be some good content there. So let's kind of just start rolling through here. Don't know if there's going to be any issues. Sometimes the live stream might be a little bit wonky. This is my first time doing this in a while, so just bear with me if I have any technical issues. But want to jump straight into it, guys, and want to start with Grand Lake in Oklahoma. We're going to be doing all kinds of lakes, guys, all across the country. Northern lakes, southern lakes, Tennessee River, deep, clear lakes, shallow, muddy lakes, everything like that. So it not a big deal if these few lakes aren't exactly what you're looking for. Or are similar to the lakes that you have, because I think a lot of the tips of how I break down these lakes can translate to any fishery across the country, but I will be doing specific breakdowns for specific lakes as well. So I'm going to try to get like a request system set up through Patreon again, kind of like I used to in the past. Don't have that all set up quite yet. Just wanted to get back in the groove and start streaming a little bit. So anyways, let's jump back into it. So basically got Grand Lake in Oklahoma here. And one thing I wanted to do is use some of the tools that I've developed over the past 5 years that we didn't have when I first did these live streams. One of those being the deep dive tournament data. So what I actually did, guys, for you, and I thought this would be a nice treat for these streams, is I actually pulled the data down from our database in the deep dive app from over 10,000 tournament patterns that we collected using pro anglers, basically watching live stream coverage, and it shows all the top 10 finishes from tournaments all across the country. And I pulled that data down and made some pivot tables. Nothing fancy for these streams. I don't have fancy charts or anything. I'm just trying to do the fast and easy process here. But I wanted to use these pivot tables and some of this data to help give a better perspective of what we should be looking for on the lake from seasonal patterns and from historical data. One thing that's kind of nice about the data set is that we can break it by specific lake, and we can also break it by lake type with specific characteristics. So for example, in this first set of pivot tables, we have Grand Lake specifically. But then, for example, on Lake Norman, where we don't have as much tournament data, I grabbed a sample of highland reservoirs that is comparable to Norman with a lot of the same characteristics, and we're going to use that. And same thing for Sam Rayburn. We actually have enough data for Sam Rayburn, but I wanted to give a comparable sample as well for that, because I actually find the data is more accurate at times when you have a full sample of lakes. So let's go through Grand. I want to talk about some of the stuff here. So basically, if you take a look, we're planning for February, 1st of February. So what should we be doing on Grand Lake in February? Well, one, fish are going to be in their winter patterns. So 100% of the top 10 finishes in February on Grand Lake come in the winter patterns, basically. Still really cold here. Last time I was on Grand a couple days ago, or like last week, water temps were 39 degrees on the lower end, 34 degrees on the upper end. It was iced over recently, so not the ideal conditions we're looking for. But it is clearing up, and we'll kind of talk through that. But basically, next up, you can see that we have about a 50-50 split between clear and stained water. So we're not going to be wanting to find dirty water this time of year. We want to stay in that stained to clear water. And more importantly, we also have a 50-50 split between shallow and offshore. Now, for me, as you guys know, I'm an offshore angler, so I'm just going to ignore that shallow water stat like all the time because I just like fishing offshore. So I'm going to focus more on the offshore patterns, but it is nice to have the option to go up shallow if needed. And so I'm going to kind of break it down, assuming both, and that way you guys can have a perspective on both of those. In terms of where these guys are catching the majority of their fish, top 10 fish in February, mid-lake accounts for 91% of the patterns. So mid-lake is definitely dominant on Grand Lake in February. A lot of these anglers are fishing main lake or first half of the creek. So mid-lake, first half of the creek, main lake. Lower end, there's some really good fish on the lower end of Grand Lake as well. I think they get a lot of fishing pressure because that's where the clearest water is. And so maybe the amount of fishing pressure on the lower end makes it not as good during the actual tournaments. And these are all major tournaments, so this doesn't count like weekend jackpots or like BFLs or anything. Anyway, so if we keep rolling through here, we can see that from a structure standpoint, really you want to be fishing rounded points, pockets, channel swing points. So some type of point is going to be really good this time of year in general. And then you're going to be fishing docks, rock transitions, brush piles, rock piles. From a bait perspective, jerk baits are dominant. So trying to find a jerk bait pattern is going to be really, really good on Grand Lake this time of year, followed up by a football jig. So really looking at the overall data, I'm thinking that we're going to be dealing with a jerk bait pattern around some boat docks, rock transitions, brush piles, fishing some points probably, mid-lake, first half of creek, main lake, trying to find some stained or clear water. So that gives us a pretty good idea of where we should be starting. Not like the end-all be-all. There's always things you can be doing that are different from the historical patterns, but this gives us a good overall view. So now that we have that established, let's pull up Navionics, and I want to actually go through the Deep Dive app as well. This is the cool thing about having the Deep Dive app, something I've been working on for like 5 years now, is we have a lot more data to work with when we break down these lakes. So first up, I got the water clarity maps here. So the water clarity map in the Deep Dive app basically is generated using satellite imagery. So every time there's a clear day over Grand Lake, we get a satellite imagery. We use machine learning to basically calculate the water clarity from the image, and it's kind of sophisticated stuff. But if we take a look, you can see that there's actually like a historical slider you can slide through. And so on January 13th, 2 weeks ago, the water was pretty stained up across the lake. All through the lake, you can see that it's pretty stained up or dirty. However, over that kind of next 2-week period, the lake is starting to clear up. We haven't had as much rain or anything like that recently, so the lake is clearing up. We actually had an image that updated yesterday, January 31st, and the lake is much clearer. So if we go back just 3 days ago, you can see on this lower end, kind of in this mid-lake, it's still pretty stained up and dirty. But then if you move forward just a couple days, it's really clearing up. So that is a great sign for offshore fishing and just kind of fishing in general. The majority of the lake, at least half the lake at least, is stained to clear, which is what we're really looking for. A couple other things to kind of take a look at if we go over here. Water level is basically been a little bit above normal pool. They're pulling the lake down a little bit, which is good and should actually get these fish a little more aggressive. You can see there's actually a lot of current that's flowing through the lake. They're pulling current constantly to keep that lake down, which actually should help the bite as well. So that's pretty cool. So that's kind of what we can be expecting. There's other stuff we can look at in the Deep Dive app, like the wind effects that shows you where the wind's blowing and stuff, but that's more like day-to-day stuff. I'm not going to worry about like which banks are getting hit by the wind or anything. In this, I'm going to go more kind of a higher level perspective with like the water clarity and things like that. But we're going to hide that for now. So now we got really good information basically that basically this whole mid-lake area has that clear to stained water. So we're not going to have to worry too much about, getting in an area that has dirty water, as long as we kind of stay probably just south of the Patricia Island area. I guess that's what that island is called there. Monkey Island is another place people call it. So kind of staying through here. So what... if we kind of roll through here, we want to be looking for some patterns that kind of correlate with the data that we had here, which is mid-lake, first half of creek, main lake stuff, rounded points, things like that. So if we wanted to start digging into the map study has changed a lot for me over the past couple of years, maybe last like 5 years, since the introduction of live scope. In the past, when I would go out here and fish in the wintertime, my main strategy was going to be find channel swing banks, steeper banks, and things like that, or try to find some flatter offshore flats that stick out from the bank, maybe like a little flat that extends out here, and look for brush piles or rock piles or something like that. And that has been something that I still would probably do. I might get on some of these longer rounded points over here, throw a jerk bait, throw an Alabama rig, throw a jig, stuff like that. Nowadays, though, I kind of have changed my approach a lot on how to break down lakes. And instead of trying to focus so much on a specific type of structure on the map, like looking for a rounded point or things like that, I try to figure out the best area I can on the lake, the overall area on the lake. I don't necessarily care so much about what structure is in that section of the lake, just because we have so many pieces of structure around this whole map to look at. I mean, we have ditches here, another ditch, another ditch. If you want to fish ditches or drains, there's a million ditches or drains. You have these nice rounded points over here. You could fish these saddles over here. There's another, saddle. There's humps. There's channel swing points. I'm just going on and on and on. A lot of rounded points, all kinds of stuff in here. So I don't necessarily care when I'm planning to go to the lake what cover's available or what structure's available, just because there's a lot of structure everywhere, and everyone has access to these maps now, knows how to read them. So more importantly, you want to find an area that has a high potential for holding fish. So if we kind of pull back up the Deep Dive app, one thing I do like to look at pretty regularly is where the water has some sort of change or variation in it from a water clarity perspective. That always gives me a good sign of if there's going to be a concentration of fish around there. So if we go to like Grand over the last few days, one thing you'll notice is that the backs of these creeks and things like that are starting to clear up. So right in here, in this stretch of this creek, it's starting to clear up. Let me kind of see if there's any other areas that are like that. Right, trying to kind of figure out, maybe I need to zoom out a little bit, which areas in here in this mid-lake are clearing up. And it looks like a couple areas that have cleared, really the main area that's cleared up on this map is right in here in this creek. So from 2 weeks ago, it was very stained. Now it's clearing, and now it's even more clear. The reason I like this is because most likely anglers have been avoiding this section of the lake because it's been so muddy or stained up, and the fish maybe have received less pressure recently. And by basically finding areas that maybe had less than ideal conditions a few days ago, but now better conditions, you'll find fish that are less pressured or less bothered by other anglers. So this section is very appealing too, in the sense that there's a nice bridge right here, has a choke point. We saw in the Deep Dive app earlier that there's current flow running through the lake. So if we pull up over here, you can see that there's a bunch of cubic feet per second, like 1,300 cubic feet per second, or 13,000 cubic feet per second pulling current, and they're pulling current constantly. So the more current flow you have going through, the better these choke points are going to be. And anything on either side of these choke points could be very, very effective. And with all that water pulling from the backs of these creeks, it's going to be slamming up against some of these channel swing banks, slamming up against the bridge pilings, things like that. So we have clearing water, so these fish are going to be a little bit easier to catch. They've been less pressured. We have a nice choke point. The only thing that we kind of have to think about is where this is in the lake. Horse Creek is kind of an interesting place because it's a very big bay, and I would consider this almost still like main lake, even though it is its own creek. So I would consider this more like first half of the creek, and then this out here is more main lake, even though it's not really main lake or first half of creek. It's kind of a weird scenario. But I would think that basically anything on the south side of this bridge in this zone, or anything just north of this bridge in this zone, is going to be a high potential area. Now, let's think about some other factors. One, we have the water temperature. So water temperature, I know, has been like in the low to mid 30s. I think I ran, the other day I was on Grand, the fishing was horrible. I ran over here to Drowning Creek, and the water temperature was 37 degrees at some places around in Drowning Creek, which is ridiculously cold. So even back up in here where it's been dirtier, it's probably even colder. So how do we manage that? How do we handle that? And the main thing I like to do is try to find areas where you can have some warmth for the fish, which is usually going to be harder bottom area or rock. With how cold the conditions are, finding some type of rock that holds heat, especially on sunny days, is going to draw more fish over to it. So where can we find some rock? Well, a couple things we could do. We could go over to Google Earth, and if we go over to Grand here, we can see maybe some areas that have some rock potentially on Google Earth. Maybe not the best indicator right here, but let me just try to find an image where the lake's drawn down just a little bit. Maybe we can find some potential images that are decent. Like this one's decent. So obviously in here we have the rock on the riprap, which could be a great spot to go throw crankbait, Alabama rig, stuff like that. But more importantly, if you go down some of these banks like here, I know from experience there's actually a road bed that runs right here, and I can draw a line on it. It runs right there, and it runs out into the middle of the lake. This is a great spot for these fish to be setting up this time of year, just because it extends out here, and there's probably some scattered rock. I think there may even be like a house foundation or something kind of crazy out here, which is going to hold heat. And when those areas are holding heat like that, it's going to attract the crawfish, the bait fish, and the bass. And instead of focusing on trying to find specific structure and things, a lot of times I like to find these isolated rocky outcroppings. Now the challenge is that this might be too shallow for this time of year. Maybe the fish are setting up in 20, 25 feet of water. Maybe they're in 15 feet of water. And maybe that road bed doesn't extend far enough out into the lake to actually make a difference. So what I would also want to do is just graph a lot of this area. Basically, this entire zone here is free game for me to be graphing. And so when I would get to the lake, I would launch my boat, probably launch over here, Southwinds Marina, and I would move over here, and I would just idle all of this stuff. And if you take a look at a contour map, pull this back up, you can see there's a lot of rounded points, a lot of pockets, a lot of things. I know that, in general in this area there are a lot of like scattered debris and things like that are just kind of out here. There's a little ditch with a point that sticks out, another little kind of rounded flat. Then you have these nice drop-offs right here from like 15 to 40 feet of water, and then these long banks that stick out here as well. So all of these long kind of tapering areas all have potential for holding fish, and that's one thing I've learned with the live scope, guys, is that there can be fish all over the place, like everywhere you go. And so a lot of times, instead of focusing so much on saying, okay, there is a rounded or like a ditch right here or a hump right here, what I instead will do is try to go to these obscure areas that are kind of in this general zone, or maybe this big flat out here, and find, like I showed earlier on Google Earth, a small little rock vein that sticks out from the bank that could hold a larger concentration of fish. You could also find some rock piles or things out here. Maybe there's some cement things that have been dropped out here over the years, or just bigger rock structures. Now, I'm not always looking for rocks, so sometimes I might be looking for brush piles, I might be looking for other things. If water temperatures were 45 to 48 degrees, I probably would be saying go to this similar type area, but look for brush piles instead of rock piles, just because the water's warmer. And that all just is dictated by the current conditions. And I just know that rock is something that's very effective at grouping up fish when the water gets really, really cold. So that would be something that I would really be looking for. Another thing to pay attention to is the fact there's probably going to be a really big shad kill on this lake. So water temperatures are 37 degrees. The shad are going to be dying like crazy. So one strategy that is very effective, if you're watching like the Toledo Bend BPT tournament right now, guys are live scoping like crazy, just getting into random like cuts and drains and just rolling into here and just finding fish that are just suspended out here. When you have a big shad kill, though, that makes it really difficult for you to differentiate your bait from all of those dying shad. And while you still can catch those fish, a lot of times it's a losing battle. So instead, trying to find areas that have rock that may have crawfish, bluegill, some crappie, other types of basically other types of forage for those bass in them is a lot of times a better plan than trying to compete with all the dying shad that are in the area. So that is another potential strategy to go after given the current conditions on the lake. So that is a little bit on Grand Lake. I'm not going to stay on Grand or any lake for too long. I kind of want to roll through all these lakes and then get some questions answered. But if you guys have any questions, I guess Dylan's asking what a current pattern would be on Grand. I mean, honestly, if I was going out to Grand, the thing I just mentioned, I would be going in exactly what I'm talking about, this general zone, and I would be looking for rock. I would be trying to throw jerk baits over rock piles, throwing little swim baits, maybe an Alabama rig, stuff like that, around rock. Any sort of offshore rock that's deeper, 15 feet of water, 20 feet of water, main lake stuff, clear water. You're always going to find fish in brush piles. You're always going to find fish in like stump fields and stuff like that this time of year as well. So if you have good brush piles, definitely could be a player. I don't like running brush piles all that much when I go to the lake because I just don't have that many found around the lake. And I find that I have better success on rock on Grand compared to brush most of the time because I can find schools of fish. And I can also find schools of fish on shell beds, but rock and shell is kind of what I focus on more than brush most of the time, actually, if I'm going to the lake, just because you may have to run 30 brush piles in a day to find one good one, and a lot of times it takes too long for me to graph and find 30 brush piles if I don't have a bunch of fish found. So that's kind of the deal there. So let's go over to Rayburn. Let's see here. Let me read through some of this stuff actually before we jump across because I got some good comments. Let's see here. Good to see everyone over here in the stream, by the way. Got Brandon Lee. We got Painter. We got G and Nate and Joe. How's everyone doing? So got Dylan, the dad bod angler. Let's see here. Let's see. Joe's asking, it would be great to see how good the app is doing by doing a breakdown of what the FLW is doing. So actually we do have, right now we ran a video for Deep Dive. And you can actually go to the Deep Dive YouTube channel, and I did a breakdown for the Toledo Bend Major League Fishing event. They actually aired it during live. They only played it for it was a 2-minute video, so it was very easy to miss. But it lined up very well with everything that's going on the lake, predicted a lot of the patterns they're working. So you can go find that on the Deep Dive YouTube channel. Just do Deep Dive app, and I have a full breakdown over there, which is pretty cool. Let's see here. And then it said, Dad, cool to see you on the Major League Fishing coverage today. Turned away, but thought, wait, I know that voice. So that's really cool there. Water's still frozen in northern Indiana. Yeah, I know it was frozen here a little bit ago too. So definitely not the most ideal conditions. I was on the lake actually a little bit today. Just went out and fished for fun for a little bit. And water temps were still 39 degrees, which is not great. Okay, so let's keep rolling. I'm going to break down the next lake. So let's get over here to Sam Rayburn. So Sam Rayburn Reservoir is a lowland reservoir over in Texas. So it is going to be very different from Grand Lake. And that's the one thing, guys, whenever I'm breaking down lakes, you have to take into account the situation that's happening on the lake and also where it is in the country. So for example, on Toledo Bend, Sam Rayburn, places like that right now, they got a pile of rain, so the lakes are coming up like crazy. A lot of dirty water on the lake, and water temperatures are actually pretty warm. I think some of the water temperatures are in the 60s on Toledo Bend, so I'm sure it's similar on Rayburn right now. So if we take a look at Rayburn, it's a massive lake. So again, how do you narrow down a massive lake into a smaller zone? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up lowland reservoir data from the Deep Dive app. This is all data from top 10 patterns that happen on lowland reservoirs in February that have all the same characteristics as Sam Rayburn. So you can see all over the place in terms of seasonal patterns, but mainly the fish are going to be pre-spawn or winter patterns right now. Far as water clarity, stained water dominates. So if we can find some stained water, that's actually going to be our best bet in terms of finding fish. Looks like on Sam Rayburn in February. Shallow and offshore is a 50-50 split, which is not surprising. And again, these are all top 10 finishes. So it's like 50% of top 10 finishes came offshore, 50% shallow. This is all collected from live tournament coverage. So very accurate data here. And then if we take a look, we can see the mid-lake and the lower end are split almost equally, 45% to 42% in terms of which section of the lake is best. And then first half of the creek and main lake seem to be kind of what we're looking. So very similar, mid-lake to lower end, kind of similar to what we looked at Grand. But stained water definitely is playing a little bit more, mainly probably because there's just more stained water on Rayburn. As far as areas, offshore flats, pockets, rounded points. So actually kind of similar to Grand also, but the offshore flats definitely stand out, especially because of the lowland reservoir element where the lakes are very flat. And brush piles and standing timber are our number 1 and number 2 cover, which makes a lot of sense. A lot of brush piles and standing timber on those offshore flats, on those rounded points, on the shallow flats, even in these ditches and drains. And from a bait perspective, bladed jig is super popular. Any type of grass that these anglers are fishing, bank grass, offshore grass. And then deep diving crankbait, deep diving jerkbait, probably going to be big players for me if I was going to be out there fishing offshore, and then the list kind of continues. So we need to be looking, looks like, for pre-spawn and winter fish, stained water, first half of creek or main lake, and the mid-lake and lower end. So that is good insight there. So let's pull over Sam Rayburn. As always, let's kind of take a look at what's going on in Rayburn on the Deep Dive app. Just kind of roll through here. We can see that the lake level is shooting up over the last week. It was 6.5 feet low. Now it's 3.5 feet, so it's come up 3 feet in a week. That's a pretty aggressive rise. Could be changing where these fish are setting up and where they're moving to very quickly. So conditions are constantly changing here on Toledo Bend and on Sam Rayburn. Current flow-wise, they're pulling some current, but really they're kind of just letting the lake fill up. So not a big deal there. From a water clarity perspective, we can see that about a week ago, before all the rain, the lake was relatively clear in this lower end and mid-lake area. So lower end and mid-lake, pretty clear water. But then if we move ahead here to just a day ago when we got our newest image, the backs of some of these creeks on the lower end are super stained up. And we do still have some clear water kind of in this dam section of the lake and about up to this major creek right here. So it's actually the full upper end. So basically right in this creek here and from like, I forgot what this place is called. Is it Indian Creek? What is this? Cedar? I have no idea what this creek is called. Trying to find the Ware branch? Maybe. Anyways, this creek here, which is kind of in this zone on the deep dive app. So right there, you can see it has some clear water with some stain in the back, but not terrible. And then you can see further down the lake, there's a lot of stained up pockets and things like that. But I really like the look, honestly, of the Veach Basin area where you have some dirty water coming in, but not a ton, which should bring in some nutrients. And also this little creek here, whatever the name of it is. And I know historically these are two really good creeks in general, but a couple other outlier creeks that could be potential players if we kind of scroll around the lake that I kind of like the look of is this little zone in here. You can see there's actually a little bit of stained water that's flooding in the backs of, I think it is, let's see here, which creeks are these? It's kind of hard to get my bearings here. Let me switch out of the 3D, that'll probably help. Okay, so yeah, this creek, these couple creeks right in here are getting a little bit of, let's see, where I am. Oh, here we go. Sorry, guys. I'm all screwed up. Here we go. So these creeks right here are getting a little bit of stained water in them, though they're staying relatively clear, and there's also some good runoff kind of in these areas. And because of all this rain coming in, I have a feeling that these creeks, though they're staying clear, they're getting just enough runoff. Looks like, as you can see here, it was very clear a week ago. Then it got a lot of rain and it was pretty stained up in this whole general area, and now it's clearing again, and I like how that creek is clearing up right in there. So this would actually probably be an area where I would like to check out. I actually think Mark Rose won a tournament, or FLW tournament out here off one of these humps, Dragon Carolina rig. I may be wrong on that, or at least he did well. But I really like this area because it's a smaller area. It's not like this giant area like Veach Basin, which is just a ton of water to cover, or like this creek up here, which is a ton of water to cover. I kind of like getting in this zone where it's clearing up slightly. It's getting into a little bit clearer water, and I might be able to find some offshore fish and maybe some fish and grass. So I'm going to pick this creek right here as kind of an area where I'm going to check out. As far as where I'm going to be fishing, where I'm going to be looking, I know there's actually some really good historical imagery on Rayburn. So I'm going to go... Oh, I have it marked here. I'm going to go over here to Rayburn. And I know that there's an image of the lake drawn down. And I think this creek should have it. Oh, maybe it doesn't have the whole thing. That would be unfortunate. Let's see. We're going to get lucky. We got like half the creek. It's fine. So we go in here, and we can see that there's a lot of interesting stuff that's going on in this creek. So a couple things that I see right away. We have nice road bed that runs through here. That's pretty interesting. We have some nice drains or ditches that wind through here. Another road bed that runs across right here. Also a little underwater bridge. That's kind of an interesting little funnel point that could be holding some fish. But these are all very obvious things. I think the stuff that I would be really focused on looking for, especially given the situation of, you know, this lake clearing up and all that, I would want to be trying to find some fish that are setting up either in the middle of these drains, so like kind of in this general zone right in here, that are kind of just roaming and cruising. Those fish seem to be very productive. That's what Michael Neal did on Rayburn a year and a half, 2 years ago. He was catching fish in these kind of mouths of these pockets, in these little drains and things like that. And if we switch over to here, you can see that there's basically a little creek that runs through. There's another one that runs in right here, and then we have another couple that run in here and here. We have a small one that runs here. These are all areas I would really be interested in looking at, and I would try to basically see if I could find fish that are either roaming and cruising in the center of these drains and live scoping them with jerkbaits, Demiki rigs, stuff like that. But if not, there may be some fish that are setting up on the edges of these drains or these ditches. These are pretty wide drains, and if you could find, again, rocky spots, a sharp edge in the grass, a area of grass where there's a bunch of grass around, there's a big hole in the grass, this all has potential for holding fish, especially offshore. And the only way you're going to know what's down there, guys, is getting on your graph and side imaging this area. So I would get in here, I would start by graphing basically probably out in front of this major point in this general zone. If I kind of drew it on the map, actually, it'd probably be easier. And you have to remember, all this stuff will be underwater. So if I kind of wanted to show you how I would graph this, I would basically come in here. I would graph probably, move this out here. I'd probably graph this little ditch here. Then I would come across, and again, this is going to be out of water. So it would be underwater. So I graph all of this. I just kind of do some sweeps through here. I probably go out here. I'm just going to do a lot of zigzagging, guys. This is kind of what my graph path would be, so to speak. So it's not necessarily a straight linear line. I probably come through here. I do something like this, maybe cut back through here. So that's like how I would graph this. It looks ridiculous, but that is kind of the path I would take. And what I'm looking for is, again, I would expect if I kind of just save this. There we go. I save this. I would expect that there's going to be, oh, that's probably not good. Probably good shad in this zone, potentially. Maybe some fish that are setting up in the middle of the creek. There may be some fish that are setting up right on the edge, right on where this drop-off is, again, on a hard edge of grass. Maybe there's a little spot of like clay or something like that. You can kind of see how the bottom sets up here where it goes from silt to that clay. A lot of times I'll actually set up and stage on that stuff, even though it looks like nothing. I would also be looking, I think you can probably see some, I know I've caught fish on these like little dimple things. I don't know what they're called. I'm going to see if, I've graphed them before. Let me see if I can find some. Let me look around. There's some on this drawn down imagery I remember seeing, and that's why I was interested in them. probably passing over some. Maybe, oh, here we go, up here. So, see how you have like these dimply, like, there's a big area here where it's just like sand, and then you get some of the grass that's growing in. And I know this is out of water, but like normally it would be underwater. So all this stuff would normally be underwater. So you're trying to find these bottom composition changes. So you basically get like, for example, this little drain where you have hard bottom here, soft bottom in the middle, and those fish will kind of pull into that little cut, and they'll use the bottom hardness to basically choose where they're going to be. Maybe they'll set up on an isolated stump, a couple stumps through this area. But a lot of times I'm looking for just like little subtle stuff right like that, little bottom composition changes, nothing crazy. And this area may not be the best area on the lake, but the other thing too, guys, I find is that if you go to a lake like a Sam Rayburn and you get into a zone like this and you just say, I'm going to draw an area around like this, there's enough fish in Sam Rayburn and a lot of lakes like Grand Lake, there's enough fish that you can catch a good bag of fish. Maybe you won't win the tournament. Maybe it's not a 30-pound bag of fish. But there's enough fish in this general zone for you to do well in a tournament or do well on a fun day of fishing. So instead of trying to say, okay, I'm going to fish a little bit here for an hour, then run over to Veach, then run up to this area, I don't really like to do that as much anymore, especially now with the live scope, because I feel like I can graph this area with side imaging. I can get a really good sense for what's going on. I can then drop the scope, and even if there's only a handful of fish in each of these little deals, I feel like I can pick them off a lot more efficiently and actually get those fish to bite. And I don't need to find this big giant group of fish to make the fish competitive and all kinds of stuff. Back when I was doing these breakdowns in the past, I used to spend a lot more time graphing, to be honest. I would graph all of this bay, and if I didn't see a group of fish that was actively feeding or stacked up or just perfect on the graph, I would move on, and I would graph for another 4 hours over here, and then I would spend another day graphing for 4 hours over here and 4 hours over here, blah, blah, blah. But you don't necessarily need to do that as much with live scope anymore, because even if you could find a spot that has 100 fish in it, 200 fish versus 1,000 fish or whatever in the past, that's maybe exaggeration, but maybe there's like groups of 2 or 3 fish and there's 100 groups of 2 or 3 fish scattered through here versus 2 groups of 100 fish that are set up on a very specific spot. You don't necessarily have to get bothered by that much anymore because of live scope. Now, if you don't have live scope or forward-facing sonar, you can still use this approach and graph through here, and there's a chance you'll find a group of fish stacked up on the edge of the grass, a group of fish stacked up in the middle of one of these drains, and you can catch some really good ones and do really well, even without forward-facing sonar. But to find a group that's actually going to be easy to target, easy to catch, you may have to graph multiple areas, maybe up to 3 or 4 areas, and maybe spend multiple days trying to graph those areas to find a big group of fish. Now, the other option is not fishing offshore at all and just going up shallower, running some of these shallower little ditches and pockets. You can see here's a nice little ditch that runs in here. Probably has some grass in it normally if we take the water up. I'm sure there's usually probably some offshore hydrilla or things in here. And there's a nice, transition from hard clay to softer bottom. And if there's some grass growing there, throw in a lipless crankbait, a chatterbait, things like that. Still very viable strategies. Going down and following some of these little drains, if I drew a line like through here, all through here, you could follow that drain. If you transfer this over to your fish finder, you can transfer that path and you can just follow that little drain. You can see there's a boat there, boat there, boat there. I think the spot has them. At least it had them in November of 2012. Anyways, so that's a strategy you can employ as well and just kind of start fishing. And that's a viable strategy as well. If you don't know how to transfer your paths or your waypoints to Google Earth, I have a video on my channel. Just Google Fish the Moment Google Earth. It'll show you the whole process. Anyways, so basically that is kind of my approach overall. Again, kind of figured out that this area is going to be more effective potentially than other areas using the water clarity feature over in the Deep Dive app, and basically just saying like, okay, it was clear a few days ago, stained up real bad, maybe these fish weren't getting as pressured because it's so stained up there. Then the water now is cleared up, it's clearing, fish might be a little bit easier to catch, maybe a little bit more aggressive potentially, and so I like this area because it's a clearing water area. Now, some days that's not the only thing I take advantage of. So for example, let's say I get into this area, let's say I'm going over here and I want to check the wind. And I say, okay, I really want to look tomorrow and see what the wind's doing. Well, in the Deep Dive app, we have the wind effects, so you can see that all of these banks are getting impacted by the wind, all the places in yellow. That's basically where the wind is hitting the bank, and it's based on the direction of the wind, the distance the wind actually travels across the lake, and then the topography of the land. So this little creek in here, this side could be very, very effective if I go out like tomorrow, for example. But then if we skip ahead a few days, maybe this section over here is going to be more effective because the wind shifts out of the north. And so you can kind of figure out in general which side of the creek or which side of the area is going to be better to start graphing in. So for example, if I was going out on Sunday, I would probably start by graphing in like this zone over here because the wind is blowing into these banks here, right here. But then if I'm going again tomorrow or like today, this is going to be a good area because the wind's blowing in there. The wind usually makes these fish more active in general. It's not perfect. That's not like a perfect rule of thumb, but usually if there's some water movement, it will make things a little bit better in general, just for getting number of bites. So that's kind of the deal there. Okay, so that is Rayburn. Next, let's go to Lake Norman. So Lake Norman is kind of a special case. Let me get out of here. Let's go over to Lake Norman. We're going to fly all the way over here. Okay, so Lake Norman is another highland reservoir. It's over in the Carolinas. And we're going to take a look at some of the deep dive data, just to kind of see what they say about the highland reservoirs in general. But this is data, because we don't have as many tournaments specifically on Rayburn or on Norman, just from our data we collected, there's just not that many tournaments, or not enough for a significant sample to give us like statistically significant results. I could basically pull data for lakes that are similar to Lake Norman. So as you can see, in February, you're dealing with winter and pre-spawn bass. Clear to stained water is still going to be the best, kind of erring on the clearer side. Shallow and offshore, going to be pretty effective, equally effective. Mid-lake and actually upper end and lower and lower end are kind of tied, but mid-lake is definitely kind of that general zone that seems to be doing okay. More main lake stuff, which is interesting. As far as structure, we got rounded points, channel swing point, channel swing bank, ditches, pockets, and then rock piles, docks, chunk rock, rock transitions. So kind of the typical stuff. So if we want to take a look then at the actual lake, and we go over to Norman, one thing about Lake Norman is it's covered in docks. There's docks everywhere. And I think that in general, the main strategy you're going to be dealing with on Norman is fishing docks in specific locations. And one thing I know, guys who are really good on Norman, they have a million brush piles marked around on these boat docks. And that's where you're going to catch your bigger largemouth. And if we go over to like a Google Earth, you can see that there are boat docks all over the place. They're everywhere. So with this many boat docks around, it's like, how do you know which boat docks to fish? And that's kind of what I'm going to try to show you guys how to do here, is maybe pick which boat docks are going to be better or worse depending on the current situation on the lake. And if you're out here on Norman, honestly, I would recommend going and just spending a ton of time graphing brush around boat docks. So just like go into a bunch of creeks and graph boat docks. But if that's not like something you can do and you just have a pile of brush found, let me show you how you can kind of narrow down a section of the lake that's more effective, so that way you can just focus your time graphing one specific section versus going all over and just fishing every boat dock on Lake Norman, which is not a productive strategy. So let's see here. Lake Norman. Basically what I'm going to do, first thing we're going to do, let's say you're fishing a tournament like this Saturday. And I know someone mentioned in the comments they're actually fishing a tournament, an ABA, on the 17th. So this is not the 17th, it's just going to be this Saturday, but we're just going to pretend like it's this Saturday. So what I'm going to do is, again, pull up Deep Dive app. I use Deep Dive app a lot, to be honest, guys, and like I know it feels I feel like people feel like it feels salesy that I'm talking about the deep dive app, but like it actually is a tool that I have made to help make fishing easier. And no one complained when I was breaking down lakes with just Google Earth and Navionics. But now we have Deep Dive, which gives us more data, which makes it even easier to break down lakes. So that's why I'm using it. I'm using it because it actually helps the process, not just to sell the app. So just wanted to call that out. But basically, if we look here in this, the situation right now, you can see that the newest data we have is 3 days ago, just based on cloud cover and stuff. But if we look at Norman over the past week, very muddy on the upper end, very, very muddy on the upper end. All this is super stained up. There's a few backs of these creeks that are slightly clearer, but it looks like the majority of the clear water and stained water is kind of in this general zone. If we skip ahead to 3 days ago, we can see that the water is clearing in some areas and getting more stained in others, which is kind of interesting. So, these creeks here, they were clearer a few days ago, right in here. Now they're actually getting more stained. So maybe just rain in the area, things like that. If we go over here to the lake level, you can see lake's been rising, probably getting some rain and stuff like that. And that's kind of interesting there. So what I would be looking for in here is I would say, okay, where is a creek that is potentially... I'm just going to kind of look through here. I'm trying to do this on the fly, so give me a second, guys. I want to see a creek that maybe has some stain getting into it, which is not a bad thing necessarily to have stain coming in, but isn't getting blown out. So I really like these creeks right here. So these creeks I really like, because if you look 3 days ago to a week ago, these creeks have the same visibility in them week over week. That means the water in here is going to be relatively stable. Let's see on the other side if that's the case. You can see in these creeks here are actually staining up. So what I'm looking for are areas that are more stable. So these are more stable areas in general. So we're kind of looking right in here. Let me see if I can find an image of the lake. I don't know if the lake ever gets low, but maybe we can find a lower image. Google Earth here. Give me a second. Just want to see if there's anything that looks better here. Not really seeing anything. I think that they probably keep this lake pretty steady just because of all the boat docks. I think there's a lot of pole boat docks and stuff. So I'm pretty sure they keep the lake pretty steady. Not seeing anything crazy. Okay, so we don't have any good imagery or anything to help us there. But then let's say we're going to Saturday. So again, want to go to the wind effects map. Now I want to see where the wind's going to be blowing on Saturday. So Saturday, super calm. The only thing I can see is a little bit of wind, just a little bit, is hitting these banks. There's a couple of banks that are getting hit by the wind, but basically it looks like it's pretty unaffected by the wind. Maybe some of these banks that are potentially on the west side could be getting just a little bit of wind. So maybe if I was going to go through here, I would try to focus on the west banks for two reasons. The sun rises in the east, sets in the west, so the western banks are going to warm up sooner with that sun rising in the east. Plus, they're actually getting some wind. So if I was going in these areas, I would be trying to graph these docks on the west banks, because they're going to get a little bit of water movement, not a ton to the point where you can't skip a jig or fish a jerkbait on the docks, but just enough wind to maybe get the fish slightly more active. And then I'm going to be trying to focus on, for example, these boat docks right through here on this nice rounded point. And that's kind of right through here. Another little stretch right in here. Has some nice docks on it. So I would try to be finding areas that are getting hit by a little bit of wind. And then I would also be finding those areas that are relatively stable with the water, that aren't just getting blown out with a lot of the rain. And a lot of these creeks actually are getting kind of blown out. Not terribly. This creek isn't too bad. It's a little bit more stained, but not terrible. Now, this is a great strategy if you want to try to go catch a bunch of largemouth. I know that that's... Actually, this creek is even clearing a little bit, so that could be decent as well. Let me hide this. Sorry guys, I'm just going through all this to show you, but this creek here is clearing just a little bit, which is not bad. And the other thing that I would be doing, in addition to trying to just graph those kind of stable water areas and graphing the boat docks for brush, is I would try to find some spotted bass, kind of setting out a little bit deeper. I know that you can catch a limit of spotted bass relatively easily on Norman. If you get into like some of these rounded or some of these like points that stick out, there's like humps out here. Maybe like there's a little high spot right here, and there's a little drain getting into another drain right here, another drain right here, long point that drops off into the channel. These sorts of areas, I would be trying to find either fish suspended around brush piles, standing timber, rock piles, and if you could find a area like this that again is relatively stable, clear water, stable water, I would graph out here trying to find bait fish or trying to find fish suspended around cover. And if you can catch a limit of spotted bass for 10 pounds in the first hour or two, then you can really commit to fishing the boat docks that you graphed earlier and just run these boat docks in this area where you have these nice channel swing boat docks like right through here. They're going to have wind blowing on them. You find areas that have brush around them. These docks are, again, steeper docks with the wind blowing on them. Find some brush around them. These docks might not be the best docks every single day because maybe the wind's different direction or the water isn't as stable. But because of the stable water and because of the wind, these docks are going to be more effective potentially on this Saturday than other docks. And it's just taking into account those current conditions, which is really important. So the idea with the overall premise with how I break down lakes is not necessarily to say like go fish this point or this piece of cover, because you're not going to know until you get out there and graph. But if you can look at the higher level conditions, the water clarity, the wind, again, in the deep dive app, you can do it with other tools. I guess, guys, if I don't know any other really good water clarity map, we have the best one that I've seen that actually, we have like up to a half a foot accuracy. We're very particular about our maps to make sure they're very, very accurate. We actually have someone who manually approves them every single day. So a human approves the map after they're generated to make sure they're not crazy. So that's something we do. But basically, these are just some tools you can use to try to break down these lakes a little bit better. And hopefully this kind of made sense of what I was doing. And then once you get into these areas, again, the depth of the fish is going to change. You don't know if they're going to be in 5 foot, 10 foot, 15 foot, 20 feet. It can change by the day, it can change by the hour. So you have to adapt and fish the moment when you actually get out there. But you can find these general zones, at least, before you get to the lake. Know where these areas are that are going to be potentially more productive, and then spend your time really dissecting those zones. Let's see here. Why do you go north instead of south on the lake? Just wondering. So I didn't go down here to the south, again, because of the clarity. So if you look over here, a week ago, this bottom section in here got really stained up, and it's like got a lot of mud that's pushing in. And just in general, when an area gets a lot of mud flowing in like that, it makes those fish less comfortable, and it's going to cause them to move and shift and change. And that's not a bad thing. So like if the water sets in at this color for like 3 or 4 days, 5 days, those fish will get accustomed to it and they'll become easier to catch. But when conditions are constantly shifting and changing around, it makes it harder to actually catch fish at times. Now there may be fish that are setting up like in the back of this if there's like a runoff or there's a bunch of water that comes in. And I know that Norman may have some blueback herring, so maybe these fish are pushing in the backs of these guts and stuff. In that warmer, if it's warm, fresh water that's coming in, maybe there's fish that are flying into the back of that. So it's not end all be all like always, but the amount of rain, the amount of craziness is happening, I feel like just indicates you should be looking for clear water or just more stable water. Now, for example, if we go to like one of my home lakes, like Beaver, which I know Beaver pretty well, is you go in through here, and if you look in the back of some of these creeks, you can see that Beaver is pretty clear all around the lake, and the water hasn't really changed all that much. It's pretty much the same everywhere, except for on this upper end where it's really, really dirty. But in this general zone over the last, day or two, you can see 2 days ago to 1 day ago, this water is starting to kind of move. It's moving up this lake. And so I probably wouldn't be fishing this zone on the lake in general. Now, if I started seeing some dirty water pushing in the back of one of these creeks, that is one of these clear creeks that's been clear all winter, and then all of a sudden, like you can actually see right here, there's a little bit of stain that's kicking in the back of this creek, just a little bit right in here. It's like this creek, it was clear. Now it's, boom, stained up just a little bit. This could be a good potential situation because you have a little bit of dirty water coming into a clear water area, which could bring in fresh nutrients, things like that. But it's not like blowing out the creek to the point where it's absolutely, blasted. So hopefully that all makes sense. Okay, good deal. So, been talking for a bunch, kind of rolling through a bunch of different things, but wanted to go through some questions. If you guys have questions about anything, happy to answer them. And also kind of want to know what you guys want from these streams. I can break down sonar footage. We can bring on pro anglers. We can do more breakdowns. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. I don't know exactly what people are interested in anymore since I'm not streaming, so would love to get some comments on the video itself if you've watched the end, or just in the stream here. Love to get some feedback because I really don't know what to be streaming. I haven't streamed consistently in years, it feels like, kind of working on the app and doing everything like that, but want to get back into it. So want to know what you guys want. That's the main thing. And I can talk about fishing and talk about this sort of stuff, breakdowns all day long, but I can also talk about the hottest trends or what happened in a recent tournament or whatever it is. Happy to take any thoughts. Let's see here. I'm just gonna roll through here while you guys are putting that. Let's see here. Caught some bigger spots last weekend on Norman, jerkbaits, and crawdad shad wrap. Nice. Let's see here. It was very low. Gotcha. Over the summer and fall. No vegetation, pretty clear. That's true. Let's see here. Just kind of rolling through here. Yeah, there was something from Whirly Bird saying you'd love to get water clarity on the Highland reservoirs out in California. The challenge with the California stuff, guys, is that the lakes fluctuate so much, like 40, 50 feet at times. So when we take a satellite image and the water's not there, it just shows up as like mud, and it shows just dirty water. And so we're trying to solve that. We just hasn't got into our priority list yet. We want to find a good solution for that, and we have some ways to think about it. But basically, when water levels drop like 40 feet over the course of the year, it gets really, really tough. So yeah, we're going to try to do that. Are you going to add contour lines on the Deep Dive app? That's kind of our plan. That's what we hope to do. We have contour lines. We have all kinds of cool stuff that we've worked with in the app. We just don't have a way to get a lot of contour lines. We have it for a few lakes, but not enough. And we've kind of just been trying to focus on like the wind effects and other things like that recently, but we're going to definitely be switching over that, hopefully, for sure. Let's see here. We're going to, I don't know when, but at least it's one of our long-term goals. Let's see. Breaking down sonar footage would be great. Definitely can do that. Got a lot of sonar footage. So we can break some of that down. Can you do a live stream on Lake Anna in Virginia? For sure. I'm going to do a bunch of different... I think I'll do lake requests. I don't think I'm going to do lake breakdowns every stream, probably. I'm probably going to do some bringing on like pros, some doing sonar footage, kind of mix it up. But yeah, I'm going to come up with like a way to do requests for lakes. Haven't got that far yet, though. What kind of lure would you be throwing that day? With the wind being so light on like Lake Norman, I would probably just be fishing a jig and a jerkbait. Probably would be throwing. Does water clarity feature work on most Kentucky lakes? So you can actually let me switch this real quick. I'm gonna show you guys where you can find this. And this list is kind of updated. It's not fully updated, I think. We just revamped all of this, but basically, oh, actually, never mind. I was gonna say we have this, but no, we don't. Anyways, there are a lot of Kentucky lakes. We have 130, I think, 150 lakes with water clarity, and we're trying to expand that as we go through here. So there are going to be more lakes with water clarity hopefully coming. We just kind of started on a sample of lakes to kind of start, because it does take a lot of resources to kind of make it happen. So we focus on our top lakes, but hopefully the app continues to grow, and the more successful the app is and the more people we have coming into the app, the more we can do. That's basically what I can say. I mean, right now we are a team of 4. Everything is here, made in the U.S. We got a team of 4 guys. 3 of them are in Texas, and then I'm here. So this is all, again, we make this here in the U.S. We're not like outsourcing this all over the world. And so we're kind of just a small team. And so any support you guys have is super appreciated. I'll just say that. And we have we're trying to get a lot of cool features to, come out with all these tools. It just takes a long time. App development is crazy. I never thought it was so complicated, but it is very, very complicated. And you would think that it wouldn't be taking 5 years to get to this point, but it definitely did. How would you would like to hear how you fish an area in terms of boat positioning and tips on techniques and patterns you'd be doing. Definitely can do some stuff like that. I love the videos when you go out and find fish and catch them without live scope, just side scan in 2D. I do too. I'm thinking about putting more content out like that. I'm thinking about doing like half my videos live scope, half my videos not live scope, potentially going forward, just to kind of do that. I like today I went out and I found a group of fish, and I caught like a 4 3/4 pounder. I lost a couple more fish. Found them all on side imaging and down imaging. Looked at them on live scope, and I thought they were actually. Let me show you guys this. This is crazy. I have my phone pulled up here, so let me pause this for a second. I'll show you this picture. This is some craziness. So let's see here. How does this work? Is this going to work? Don't know if it will. Oh, look at that. Pulling it from my phone. That is fancy, guys. So this is a group of fish that I found, and you can see them right here. I'm going to see if I can kind of weave through this. So I found these fish on, this is cool. Found these fish on this little rocky spot here, and they were on the side imaging, and I can do this. I guess this is something I can do, but I scrolled through here, and this is literally from today. You can see my GPS waypoints. So those are some fish, and they were scattered all over this. They kind of look like bass. And I found them on the side imaging, and I'm like, those look pretty good. Graphed them with down imaging. They didn't look fantastic, but I was like, let me switch to 2D. They look pretty good. Those, to me, look like bass on 2D, just based on what I see. So, 40-degree water temperature, pretty rough. But got out there, started scoping them, and I'm like, where are these fish? Where are these fish? I went around, and I'm like, what are those? These did not look like bass to me on the scope by any means. I don't know. They look like catfish or like, I don't know what's going on with these. So I almost didn't cast at them, but I'm like, you know what? They look like bass. I had my waypoint there, so I just backed off, and I just locked it on my waypoint and just started throwing at the waypoint. And I actually actually got my bait down through them kind of on accident. On the scope, this was all while I was spot locked, and the boat was kind of drifting a little bit, but there's my bait. And then I'm reeling a little tiny swim bait through these fish, and I freaking hook one, and there's one of the fish I hooked, and I had him, and I hooked him, and he came off, and he swam back down. And then I made another cast out there, and let me hide this real quick so I can find this other photo. Made another cast on it, and my next cast caught this old stud right there. So that's fish from today. Real nice one. And so got that on a little core tackle finesse tush. It's a lighter wire hook in the tush. It's a prototype we have. We're coming out with that. Super good deal. It's a little 1/4 ounce on a 2.8 little Big Bite Baits Pro swimmer. And then I actually lost 2 other ones out of that school, and then the school shut off and I couldn't get them to bite. And they were just nipping at it because the water was super cold, and they were like grabbing the tail even on a 2.8 Kitech. I couldn't get them to bite anything else, but they were just like really nipping at it. I think I needed to use a more moderate action rod or something. I don't know. There's something going on weird, but this one got it. Anyway, so that was kind of fun. But I got those fish literally didn't need live scope to get those fish at all. And I actually wouldn't have, if I didn't trust my 2D sonar and down imaging, I probably wouldn't have thrown at those fish. I would have thought they were crappie or something crazy. So by actually trusting my 2D sonar and side imaging, I ended up catching those fish. So I kind of want to go back to doing that a little bit more because I feel like I might now be overlooking certain fish just because I rely on the scope so much, and I don't think I have enough experience with the scope maybe to know exactly what fish look like all the time. But with my 2D sonar, down imaging, side imaging, I can pretty much tell what bass look like with those 3 types of sonar combined. I'm like 95% accurate, I feel like. Maybe 85% accurate. 15% of the time I'm still off, but like I'm pretty accurate. With scope, I'm just like, there's a dot there I'm going to throw at it. And I haven't really found a good way of differentiating them. I was even out in Grand the other day, and I was going around and scoping, and I was like, oh, there's some really nice bass over there. Fire over there, catch a drum, chasing shad in 10 feet of water, over 40 feet of water on a hover rig. Catch another drum. Then I throw an A-rig, and there's fish that are busting through shad 20 feet down over 40 feet of water. Look just like bass. I catch 3 of them. They're catfish. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing apparently, because I'm catching catfish and drum, and I'm catching them, but there's no bass. So I was like, oh, these look just like bass on the scope. So yeah, if I graphed them with 2D first, I would have probably been like, oh, that's a catfish, that's a drum. I can tell what they are. But I was just like, I'm gonna go scoping today, and yeah, I don't know. I really like using my traditional sonar for sure, because I don't know. Maybe it's just I'm old school, but I do like it. Let's see. Does Norman set up similar to Hartwell? Hartwell has a lot more big largemouth, and there's a lot more herring, so it's very different. But I can break down Hartwell another day. But that's very, very different in general. Teach decision making on the water, pulling all the info together to decide what to do next. I mean, I can probably share some of these stories, like what I did the other day, like what I just showed you with my photos, with my screen recordings. I can show you guys like what I graphed, what I did. It's pretty easy to do to pull this stuff up, so I might do that. Actually, I've never done that before, so that was kind of cool. So I can talk about some of that, especially when I go to like Beaver and stuff, where I'll have the map and stuff to coordinate it, and I can walk through my days. I can definitely do that. Thumbs up to support the team at Deep Dive. Appreciate that. Let's see here. What's going on? Melvin, been watching since day one. You did a little bit of Clark's Hill Lake. Yeah, I remember doing Clark's Hill back in the day. Good to see you, Melvin. Let's see here. How does Garmin stack up mapping 2D down imaging compared to Humminbird and Lowrance? I don't like Garmin stuff that much for traditional sonar, to be honest. I've found ways to make it work, and I've styled in my settings as best I can on it, and I know what I'm looking at now. But it was a big learning curve. I don't really like it that much. I really like my HDS Live. I have a HDS Live 9. I really like it. And I also really like my Humminbird Mega imaging. But the way that I record my videos, it's easier to record with a Garmin graphing unit and then do the live scope. But that's why I'm excited to kind of go back to doing the old school, like stuff with like Lowrance or my Lowrance or Humminbird units, because I can actually I can use those if I'm not live scoping, and I can still get good video content. So yeah, not the biggest Garmin fan in terms of traditional sonar, but live scope is way better than Active Target and Mega Live in my opinion, for sure. And I don't want to put like 6 graphs in my boat, so I just run 2. that's what I do. I used to run a bunch of graphs up front, and I really didn't like it, so I took all those graphs off. I just run 1 Garmin up front, 1 in the back. That's all I do. Would you say there's a difference between a Demiki rig and hover rigging? Yeah, for sure. So like on a Demiki rig / a hover rig, if we go to like Tackle Warehouse, so like if we just pull up like I don't know, let me pull up the terminal tackle stuff. Best sellers, terminal tackle. So it kind of depends on what you're doing. So if you're just going with like a standard, like, I don't know, jig head or smeltinator, whatever, this sort of thing, most of the Demiki rig stuff, the bait just kind of glides through the water and it just kind of stays straight and it doesn't really rock side to side. The key with the hover rig is that however you rig it, basically, let me duplicate this real quick. However you rig it, basically, the hover rig will cause the bait to rock side to side very aggressively. So it'll rock side to side, and it's not very heavy, so it will float above those fish, and keeping the bait above the fish and having it rock side to side is what generates most of the strikes, and you get that by just kind of twitching your rod. It'll make the bait wobble back and forth, basically, and you can get some amazing bites on it. I catch a bunch of fish on it. There's a lot of guys who are doing really well in tournaments, like a lot of guys, and they're not talking about it, and they're using it, and they just don't talk about it because they're not sponsored. So, yeah, this is like a cult following, kind of on tour, professional level. There's a lot of guys throwing this. Anyways, so the main thing, though, that's interesting is, like, for example, with this standard jig head, Jacob Wheeler, who has won the qualifying round A, he's using this Crush City freeloader, and people are saying it's just a knockoff of the Spunk Shad, but the Spunk Shad is more round. This freeloader has very tall sides, and when you fish it on a standard jig head, it actually wobbles side to side, just like the hover rig. Now, if you throw it on a really light jig head, it can still kind of get that wobble, but it's not as good. And so what I find is that when you go for like sizes like we have in the hover rig, 1/8 ounce or less, the hover rig is much more effective because it wobbles that bait side to side, basically, even with very light weight, because the weight's internally weighted inside the bait. But once you start going to heavier weights, like let's say you want to throw a 1/2 ounce or a 3/8 ounce jig head or a 1/4 ounce jig head, the freeloader gets the same action as the hover rig, but you can do it with a heavier head, and that's really nice. Now, if you put like a hover rig in the freeloader, it goes like crazy side to side, which it looks pretty good, but it also is almost a little bit overkill. So I don't like baits that are maybe as tall as this all the time. But that's kind of the idea with the freeloader and why it worked for Jacob. But there's something about that bait just kind of rocking on its side back and forth, and that's why he shakes his rod, and that's why I shake my rod with the hover rig. It's something that generates that bite with those fish, and the fish really seem to like that. So what's the difference between the hover rig and the tush head? So hover rig has a 90-degree jig head, and it's designed for hover strolling, which is to get that bait to wobble side to side. As I mentioned, the bait basically turns to one side, then flips over and turns to the other side, and you want to work that bait above the fish's head, and it's very lightweight, so you're basically just kind of drifting it or hovering it above the fish. The tush is called the ultimate swim bait hook, and it comes in heavier weights, and it's designed as a swim bait hook. It's just a swim bait hook, but all the weight is internal, so it gives the bait a better body roll, so the body of the bait rolls a lot more. But I just use the tush mainly as just a swim bait hook. I just put it on a Kitech, like a paddle tail swim bait, and we have it in all different sizes, and it's a different version of a jig head. Gives the bait more vibration and more kind of roll. You don't have the lead head sticking out of the bait, so you get better hookup ratios. It looks more compact. There's a lot of advantages to the tush, and so the ultimate swim bait hook, but it's a swim bait hook. That's what it is, where the hover rig is designed to be used more with like straight tail worms, things like that. And then we have the Ozark rig, which is basically a Texas rig replacement, which causes the bait to glide and move. And I'm going to make some videos on the Ozark rig. I haven't really talked about that much, but like it's doing really well, fortunately. And a lot of guys like are loving this, and it's completely replaced a Texas rig for me. I don't throw a Texas rig anymore. I just throw the Ozark rig, and you just rig it literally just like a Texas rig. We have some videos on Core Tackle Instagram if you want to check that out, and I'll have videos on the Core Tackle or on the Fish the Moment channel coming out about the Ozark rig. But the Ozark rig is sweet. We also have more sizes coming. We have a 5/0 quarter and a 5/0 3/8 ounce size that's in production right now, so heavier sizes coming. Let's see here. Let's see here. I look for football shapes with tails. Lol, almost every time it's a 4.5 pounder bigger. That's very truly. The only thing I found with the football shape with tails is that also that applies to like drum and sometimes like the catfish, which is very weird. And so that's what got me on Grand the other day, is I was like, oh, there's a big one. And it was like, they were big fish. They were just big catfish and big drum. It's very weird. I have a hard time fishing offshore. It just feels overwhelming and not sure where to start. Very true. It's very hard to fish offshore, and it takes a lot of time and patience. I was out there all day today, and I was fishing offshore for 5 hours, and I got that 1 4 3/4 pounder in the boat after graphing and fishing around for 4 hours, and then I lost those other fish. But if I had landed them all, I probably could have had like 5 for like 20 or 4 for like 20 pounds. They were like all good ones in that school. But I mean, it was a whole day affair for me to find those fish. So it's not easy by any means. Let's see here. Caught a few good spots on your hover rig last fall, paired it with a Guggen fluke bait. Can't wait to get back out there with it. Yeah, it definitely works. The hover rig is definitely a deal, guys. A lot of guys are throwing it, and like it's won a lot of tournaments this past year, like a lot, and no one's talking about it because they just don't want to give up the juice. Nate says, appreciate the honesty on Garmin. I think Apex have HDMI out, so maybe that would work for you. I was thinking about getting an Apex unit. They're just like $4,000, and I would have to get 2 of them, and that really sucks. If I wanted to do that, I was thinking about doing like 360, because I have a 360 on my boat, but I don't use it. It's just kind of sitting there. But I like the concept of 360, so I was thinking about that, and then yeah, the HDMI out would be great. I just don't have $8,000 to spend right now on fish finders. So Humminbird, if you're listening. Anyways, let's see here. I'm glad I'm not the only one that scopes non-bass. No, you're not. A lot of people do. Appreciate explanation. Would you ever consider hover rigging in shallow water or like pitching docks? So yeah, so actually we have, it's underneath here, guys. It's under the weedless hover rig. It's the HD hover rig. Let me pull up coretackle.com real quick. 1 second. Let me switch to this. Just bear with me. We actually have a hover rig that's designed for more heavy duty cover. So this is the HD hover rig. So we have some videos on it and stuff on coretackle.com. But basically, if you click on this, you can see that it's a stouter hook. And it's perfect for flipping. You can flip it on 20-pound test and just put it in a creature bait or whatever, and it will glide and fall around. It's thing, really just a really great action. And you can also put it in a bigger fluke and stuff like that. It's a good deal. I kind of use the Ozark rig more than this, because you get the Ozark rig actually gives the exact same action as this heavy-duty hover rig. But the heavy-duty hover rig for me is, I actually like throwing it like offshore on like bigger flukes and things with bait casting equipment, and you can then do the same motion with the smaller hover rig, but it's a 3/16 ounce with a bigger 4/0 hook. We have some other sizes coming. I think we have a 6/0 with a quarter ounce 6/0 version coming out soon too. We have a lot of sizes coming out for everything, but the Ozark rig is kind of more of my like shallow water flipping rig. You can see kind of how it's rigged up right here. It's just, you just Texas rig it basically, and it goes right there, locks the bait in, and so that gives the same action, kind of like the gliding action as the hover rig. We have some videos. We got this dude right here. Looks like he might know what he's talking about. Anyways, so yeah, there's that. Let's see here. Are you throwing a Carolina rig this time of year? Rod length and hook size. I actually threw in today. I was shocked I didn't get that school of fish I showed earlier to bite a Carolina rig. I had like a 5-foot leader on it. Water temps were 40 degrees. Thought it would be perfect. Drug it around for like 20 minutes. Never got a bite. Normally it's pretty good though, so I do have a Carolina rig on the deck of the boat. I go with like a 4 to 5 foot leader fluorocarbon, usually 14 to 16 pound fluorocarbon with a 20-pound main line, 1 ounce to 3/4 ounce egg sinker, and I just throw it on a 7.6 or a 7.8 heavy action or heavy power fast action rod. Recommended for hover rig weight for fishing over 20 to 30 feet. Oh man, that is a great question. So you can fish a hover rig that deep, but it's not the best because it's just not heavy enough. And the action gets kind of wonky when it gets that deep. We've tried some versions and stuff and tried to do some stuff. It's just really hard. We have a design though. We have something in the works that you guys are gonna love. That we have a couple of things that are kind of crazy coming out that we have not talked about yet. So Matt and I are like holding some stuff, but we have a rig that should have the hover rig action, but you can fish it like 50 feet of water. And I won't say anything more than that, but it's very cool. So anyways, we're still in prototyping. We're still in the prototyping stage where I'm making them by hand in my garage. So we don't even have like production or like any prototype molds. We're like bush leaguing this where I'm like using pliers and stuff. So yeah, we're still in that stage of prototyping, but we have a cool idea that is not out there. Would you guys like to see any of that stuff too? Like my tinkering or like Matt's tinkering with the core tackle products? Because like we have a lot of cool stuff we do, but we just don't really we haven't really shared a lot of that just because we're so busy doing everything else. But we can make videos about that stuff, kind of like the process, like how we came up with the Ozark rig. I got like all the prototypes. I don't know. I mean, would you want to see? I don't really want to film it like during the process because that's just a lot of honestly, it's a lot of work to film those things throughout. And we have so many. I have Fish the Moment and Deep Dive and Core Tackle and everything going on. But would you guys like, for example, like if I went through and said how we designed the Ozark rig, and I could give like a full history of the Ozark rig, how we did it, how we came through the process, the steps. If you guys thought that would be good, let me know in the comments. Let's see here. Do you still do on the water teaching? Unfortunately, I don't anymore, Terry. I kind of just don't have the time anymore. I'm already swamped with everything else I got going on, unfortunately. Bought a few of y'all's core tackle products recently. Just haven't had a lot of opportunity to use them, so appreciate you giving me ideas when I go out. Hopefully, the next few days. Yeah, give it a shot. It's some of the products work really well. I mean, all the products from my experience work really well. We only put out products that we actually catch fish on. So, and then appreciate the feedback too on a little background on the process would be great. Awesome. Good deal, guys. Looks like comments are kind of dropping off a little bit. I'm getting tired. It's almost 9 o'clock. So I don't know what days I'm going to be streaming or anything, guys, going forward. I don't know if Thursdays are going to work best or other days, but I'm going to try to get out of the stream once a week and do a bunch of different stuff. I don't know if I'm going to be doing more like topics or I don't know. We're going to do something. But anyways, let me know in the comments what type of things you want to talk about or you would like me to talk about or what maybe guests you'd like me to have on, Matt or other people. So just let me know. Good deal. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for joining in, and we'll see you guys in the next live stream next week, and hopefully you'll be seeing some more Fish the Moment video content coming out very soon. So appreciate y'all, and have a great night.